You're watching HCAM TV.
Hello, welcome to the Hopkinton Hangout Hour here on HCAM TV. Thanks to the team for getting us online. If you've been watching us for a while, you know that I have been broadcasting from my basement studio where I have a green screen with a picture of our studio because I've been pining away for it. And if you have any questions as to whether I am back in the studio or not, I am back in the studio, and it's really nice to be here, and I'll be looking forward to welcoming more people back as conditions allow. Today, we have a very interesting topic with our town clerk, Connor Degan. We'll be talking about the upcoming town meeting and the upcoming town election, which is very timely because just yesterday, the select board had some discussions about that. So, of course, hi, Mom. And we're going to welcome Connor into the show. Hi, Connor.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me again.
Oh, it's our pleasure. We always love having Connor Degan on our show. And also, I want to say hello and thank you to Bob and Matt, who are behind the scenes today, and Mike Tarosian, who is my co-host today. Hello, Mike.
Hey, Jeff, how we doing? You know, I've been trying to get out too, so I figured I'd go check out town election myself.
I couldn't say.
I was going to say, I see you're already hanging out at the polls there, Mike.
I took this picture just before you threw me out and said you can't stay here.
I mean, we can't say no to co-hosting when Mike's get that for a background. All right, so Connor, town meeting is first. And before we start asking you some questions, I would just give you an opportunity to give an update on where things stand.
Yes, thanks. As many people know, the town meeting in May did not happen. We postponed it originally to late September, but we have been talking about the best ways to pull this off. And one of the things that we looked at was that we wouldn't be able to do it in our normal setting of the middle school, and we wouldn't, all the interior areas in the schools where we have the most space in town just weren't going to work for various reasons, including trying to get students back into school. The schools were going to be using up that space. So we decided to look at the alternate opportunity of doing outside. Outside during our normal hours wouldn't work because we were going to be in the middle of Triple E season again, and mosquitoes would be out, and we were going to be putting people at risk for that, even if we had them all 6 feet apart. It would be a big feeding frenzy. So we are looking at doing Saturday and doing it early. So that's why now, as of last night, which is why I was so glad when you said we're doing this on Wednesday, as of last night, the select board had voted to have the annual town meeting be reconsidered to be held on the 12th of September, and it'll start at 9:30 a.m. I recommend people get there early so that they can check in and, kind of take your time. Seats will already be set up. They will be 6 feet apart. We're going to have to be really strict about the 6-foot rule and about the mask wearing during the entire operation. There will be a tent that'll fit probably just under 200 people. And then there will be room for overflow, but it might require that people aren't sitting under a tent. So if the weather is looking a little drizzly, you might want to bring an umbrella. And if it's looking sunny, wear some sunscreen and bring a hat. So
right, we're gonna get into the layout that you have come up with for there. Yep. Before that, I just want to ask a question because as I was listening to you, you said the select board voted to either consider or reconsider September 12th. Has a decision been made? Is it going to be the 12th, or is there something else that has to happen first?
It will be the 12th. So what happened was they had, back in the spring, had voted to reconsider the May date to be held on near the end of September. So they had to reconsider that vote it was just kind of, parliamentary procedure on that part. And they had
Right.
to reconsider the vote that they had already made to then move it back. And this took us looking into, can all of the committees that have to be presenting at this, can they all meet in that same timeline and still get there? Because we were all running on that we were going to be doing this for the 24th.
Mhm.
Or not the 24th, that was the 21st. So we were all running on that. And
Whoa. So
so
it
it's
went
been-
from the 21st to the 12th?
yeah,
All right, let's not say 21 anymore. Let's only
Yes.
ever say 12.
12. 9/12, everyone, 9/12.
Okay, and of course you mentioned 10, so I assume there's no rain date. It's going to happen that time.
So the only thing that could happen would be if for some reason there was a weather emergency and there was a public safety emergency. Mass general law allows for the fire chief to be able to advise the moderator on moving the meeting date in case of that kind of emergency. So that would allow for, and it was discussed last night as well, for if there was a severe thunderstorm on the 12th, then we could have it on the 13th.
Okay. All right. So in a minute, I'd like to show one of the Google Map aerial views of the high school, and then maybe you can kind of go through where things will be and how things will set up. Are you ready to do that, or are
Oh,
you
yeah.
still working on the procedures?
I have met with now multiple tent companies to review the area, and we've pretty much nailed down what the layout's going to be.
Okay.
So if you want to zoom in on this particular spot, the area we're looking at is over by the bus loop.
Okay.
Well, the
Now,
old
what
bus
other
loop, I should
areas
say.
did you consider in your quest for an outdoor location?
We consider a number of the fields, but one of the issues we looked at with fields was that if in the fall, early fall, you run into potentially like rain here and there that'll cause muddier conditions and risk of people slipping, and so let's look at a parking lot instead. Someone recommended behind the water towers, and I said then we lose all of our parking, we don't have anywhere to put anyone. So we then said, let's look at in front of the high school. And we were looking around there. The recommendation came up of using the old bus loop because it's not used as much for parking anymore. But that's all it's used for. And they don't need to worry about if a tent goes there, it's going to disrupt
Right.
school operations majorly.
Yeah.
So that was a big piece because we don't know what school status is going to be by that point. So we need to kind of go under the assumption that it could be starting to trickle back. So that's what we kind of ran on.
Okay.
Yeah,
By
I
the
think
way, it was really fun being at that meeting to see how all the pros in our community, all the things that they consider and look at when approaching a location.
Those folks are all very busy. It was really difficult to get them all together.
Well, I think that's a great idea, that bus loop, the old bus loop, because half of that is visitor parking, so there won't be any visitors. So that's a good news. The other side is, Jim, that's the staff parking, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's perfect. Then
And
you
if
got
there's no student parking, then we won't have to worry about that because staff can take up some of the additional student parking if need
exactly right.
Yeah. There's no students until the 16th.
Yeah.
So it really worked out well. All right. Are we ready? Are we ready to look at the aerial view and talk about the
be.
details?
Take a look.
All right. I do have to say one thing, because first time I showed this, Mike was like, oh, I want to go on the Ferris wheel. I'm just saying I don't control Google Images. And if you happen to see some type of, little amusement park, that's not going to be there. All right, here we go. Okay, so I'll zoom out first. So here we go right here, Hayden Row, with the main entrance in, and then this is the old bus loop, and
Yep.
this is the area that we're focusing in on. So here's the high school. Now, have things changed since we were at that meeting and talking about the general layout?
No, that's pretty much what you heard then is what we worked on, and we kept trying to figure out what the best method was from
Okay.
there.
So I can
So-
either do some explaining and point around with my mouse, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, or you can talk and describe it, and then I'll follow along with my mouse and point those areas out.
Why don't we go with option one, and then I'll let you know if there's anything that we need to that's changed
Okay.
or needs more detail explanation.
Okay. All right. So I am going to work from the inside out, and you'll see why at the end. So this area here is going to be a big tent. And inside that tent will be a couple of hundred, about 200 chairs that are physically distant so people can be safe. And they're all facing towards the school. And that's where all the members of town meeting will sit. In the front over here will be the podium and the town manager and the moderator who will be running the meeting there. This is a great location because we're right next to the school for power and for internet access, and so that we can get the signal live onto HCAM TV. We then over on this side will be another tent with other officials who need to be at town meeting, heads of boards and committees that are usually there. In the front of the big white tent will be a microphone. So if people want to address town meeting, they can come up and do that. HCAM will be tucked away over here somewhere, and we'll probably just have a robotic camera or two kind of on a low profile in the middle, getting all the action. Now, if more than 200 people show up, then there's overflow seating over in this area here. So you'll be able to see what's going on and you'll be able to hear what's going on. You just won't be able to stay dry in the case of a drizzle. And that, I think, is the outline. Did I miss anything, Connor?
No, so the only other thing then, no, you pretty much got it. So just to kind of delineate what areas will be there for the hall, legally speaking, will be that we'll have kind of the like crowd control corrals that we use like, to wall off the streets around the marathon time. And we'll have those around the edges because we can't close off the tent. It has to stay open and with plenty of ventilation. So we'll do that to make sure that people are only going into designated entry points. So the designated entry for check-in to try to ease everything through. So imagine everyone's parking over by like where the carnival is there. And then you cross the street, and where that ramp is, where the yellow hash lines are over by the bus loop there, that'll be the check-in area for the entrance. And the check-in table will probably be right on the sidewalk there. Everything else, all the other tents and chairs are going to be on the pavement. We found a method to get them all to fit. Okay.
So excluding emergency exit.
Yep.
This is the one place that town meeting members will enter and exit, I guess.
Correct.
So that you can. How do they check in? Is there people here that are like checking them in, like they give them the papers, like they usually do?
Yeah. So we'll have election staff that'll be there, and they'll be doing all the check-in for folks, so that people can make their way in quickly, get their voter cards, and then they'll be able to go and find their seats. And from there, we can pretty much just leave the folks checking there the whole time. So like usually when we have them set up in the cafeteria, they have to move to the entrance of the auditorium anyway, because they're voters too.
Right.
But this will just allow them to be right there and hear the conversation as we go through for anyone who comes in, stragglers or anything like that.
Now, are you envisioning a contiguous corral around this whole area like that, or just blocking off entrances?
We're kind of working with that. It will be kind of a it'll go around the kind of almost three-sided, but so it'll go down and around that way. Yep. And then it will go up over there, and it just needs to go to right over here. And then we can have kind of emergency exit areas, but we're going to go over a lot of that with, fire chief and all the staff over there on how we're going to do that. Okay. And then we're going to corral the spot off right over by where that access road is, so that we don't have anyone who accidentally drives up and finds themselves in the middle of town meeting.
Accidentally drives around the entire high school building and pops into town meeting. Okay. Now this may look flat, but we all know that is not flat. We all
Yep.
know that that is a hill. I wonder if we have any idea of how many seats we can get with, as they would say, an obstructed view, but still be able to see? Or are we thinking that by this point, you may have to rely on listening over the loudspeakers of what's happening at town meeting?
So we likely will not have the same ability to do presentations outside.
Mm-hmm.
We're probably not going to see the same slideshows that we usually see at town meeting. It's just we're not going to have the same kind of capabilities, especially with the sun. Trying to project something onto a screen is going to be extremely difficult. So I think right now what we're working on is just making sure that if there is an abundance of people, that they'll be able to hear everything that's going on, and they'll still be able to have access to a microphone so that they can participate.
Okay.
So basically, we're not going to have all the lovely technology that we're used to in the middle school with the changing, adding the amendments live in front of everybody, looking at documents. And I mean, I see the only upside to no presentations is a speedier town meeting.
So yeah, and right now we're looking at trying to do everything we can to make it as speedy as possible, because the faster we can do this, the safer we can make it, because we can decrease any chance of people becoming exposed. And that's our big concern, is we want to be able to get all this stuff done, but we want to make sure that no one is put at risk while we're doing it.
Right. And of course, you'll send out all the information on, when you're wearing masks, when you're not, how you're going to make the bathrooms available and so forth.
Yep.
Okay.
So how is the warrant looking? Have the select board been able to request that some things get pushed off to the next town meeting?
So the way that our charter works is that for annual town meeting, all boards and officers can put things on the warrant. And it's a 10-person signature petition to get a petition article on the warrant. So all we can do, and all the select board can do right now, and I know the select board has been active in it, the moderator, the town manager, in trying to request that if there's anything that a board or an officer is looking to get onto the warrant, to see if it's possible that we can push it off to May. Because now we're so close to the next town meeting that it's not necessarily an unreasonable amount of time to wait for a general bylaw change. Or even some minor zoning bylaw change. It's probably not an emergency piece, but if it's an emergency piece, then that's when we have to look at how do we address that, and is this going to be an issue that's going to really bring people in, and how are we going to be prepared and be cautious of the fact that if the more people show up, the higher the risk is. And there are different rules around town meetings right now than there are for the normal state rules, which is what makes it extra tricky, because we can't turn anyone away.
Right.
It's not like, at an outdoor event, it's like, oh, no, it's up to 50 people, folks. Sorry, we're already at capacity. Or it's like, oh, it's at 100, we're at capacity. We need to find space regardless. So it's trying to make sure that we can just get past the things that really need to get done. In particular, the budget. If we don't get the budget passed in September, then we're up the creek without a paddle on that.
Right. Now, do you have any sense on how things are going with the board trying to ask committees to push back their articles? Are they having success?
Many of the committees are meeting this week, I think, to be able to vote on that, because if they've proposed it as a board or committee, they need to vote on it to remove it. I know I had just heard last night as well that the planning board had opted to not remove any of its proposed bylaw changes. And we kind of anticipated that the solar article might stay on, because that's been a really hot button issue that has a lot of attention right now. And it's one we were kind of worried is going to probably be one of the big crowd attractors.
Yeah.
But we still want to just make sure that, we can do whatever we can to make sure people stay safe on it. But yeah, so beyond requesting, we'll have to see when some of these other boards and committees vote. I know that the town manager has already told us that all of the different capital articles have already been removed. We're not going to be looking at those. We're going to be instead trying to use some of those funds, unfortunately, to pay for operating expenses, just to handle the fact that we have a large budget that, that our means to collect that kind of money is not necessarily going to be realistic this year with the pandemic.
Right. So taking a quick look at the warrant, I'm just curious if you know off the top of your head, does anything else strike you as a hot button issue other than the solar that might be something that a lot of people want to show up for?
So I've actually not seen a draft warrant yet.
Okay.
But right now I'm anticipating that solar is probably going to be a big one. We had at least 2 citizens petitions that I know at least one of the lead petitioners had said that they would be interested in removing their petition for another time. And I don't know what the status is of the other one at this point, but I think that that'll probably be the primary piece. If I saw it, the draft warrant, I'm sure I could point out another thing that I'd be concerned might draw a crowd. But the one thing that's always interesting about town meeting is you never know which item is going to be controversial. I've gone in thinking, oh, this is going to be the thing that catches us for 2 hours or something, and then we have a little bit of conversation, we move on, and then sure enough, like 2 articles later, there's a discussion on a dog park that keeps us going for 3 hours. So you never know how that could turn out.
Right. Now, who draws the boundaries of town meetings? You or is it the moderator?
The moderator decides what the boundaries are of the hall.
Okay.
I'm just helping with the logistical aspect.
Right. Now, I don't know, is it possible to change those boundaries during a meeting?
It is. He can designate if for some reason the bounds of the hall have to change. So if all of a sudden we get more people than expected, so like right now we could probably fit comfortably 300 people without issue within that space. If all of a sudden 400, 500 people started showing up, then he would be able to designate where he would be wanting to expand that area to.
Okay.
And then we would move corrals around. We'd figure out a way to make sure that it gets done.
Right.
And that's it.
Right.
So Jim, don't get that.
On Saturday?
What was that?
Have we ever had a town meeting on a Saturday before?
We have not had a town meeting on a Saturday before. There are some towns that do, and I know I always hear mixed results on how those affect turnout or anything else like that. But I mean, and obviously we're not going to get a really good sample idea from this because there's going to be a lot of people who aren't going to be comfortable going out who usually would want to.
I agree. I was thinking that, boy, it'd be a great test for the next pandemic, kind of give a sense for how many people might show up. But for a regular year, probably not. Yeah.
Well, I want to comment on all the numbers, and we can expect 200 to 300 people and so forth. And we do have some hot topics that look like they're going to stay on the warrant. Although they also discussed about lowering the quorum.
Yep.
So
there was something that was given in the emergency laws regarding town meetings that allowed for select boards to temporarily decrease the quorum in case they were worried about not enough people showing up or anything like that. Because when you have people who are worried to go out, depending on what time of year you're having it too, and what stage of the pandemic we're in, you're going to see a whole bunch of people who aren't going to go at all, and you're going to see potentially less than usual. So I think the idea behind it was to just give us a safety net, and knowing that we're probably going to exceed the temporary decreased quorum anyway,
Right.
just because of how our residents and our voters tend to show up and make
Right.
sure their voices are heard.
So is it already carved in stone that it's down, that they lowered it, or?
I think that as of last night, they voted to, or they opened the discussion on it,
Okay.
so that at the next meeting, they will actually vote on what the quorum number will be.
Because
And
the
the- and-
moderator needs to be there for it.
Yeah.
And, then
Right,
we
and
can
this is
bring
a
the moderator.
one-time, and this is a one-time deal, though.
Yes. This, and if they wanted, if it was, so right now it's only for town meetings held for 2020. And
Okay.
they would have to pass a separate law to allow it in the future.
Okay. All
Because
right,
currently
Connor.
our bylaw still requires it be 1% of our voters.
Okay. I'm glad you're sitting down because my government meetings coordinator has just popped in. And so he's got some questions and he is an informed citizen. So, hi, Bob. Welcome.
Oh, I didn't know you were talking about me, Jim. Yeah. Thanks, Connor. Thanks for being here today. But some of the questions that came to mind, I know Mike touched on having access to the facilities in the high school, but I also wanted to add, and I'm going to throw these out there. You can answer them or just let them float if you want. Will there be any kind of standing room, or will everybody be required to stay in their seats and not wander around the area, like go up on the knoll so they can look down, or go outside and come back in? And what will the voting process be like? Will we still have our cards and have to stand up and have counters walk up and down the aisles and take the numbers? And then will there be a time limit on the comments that they're going to stick to, that everybody gets up and you get 2 minutes, 3 minutes to make your comment and question, unless you have to make a change to the article? Will that still be in play?
Okay, so I'm going to take those in order. So now I'll preface this with some of this is still kind of in flux. We're trying to figure out logistics on it. But as for the first question regarding like standing room versus sitting areas, so unfortunately, the way that the rules work is that if you're standing, you could be counted as someone who's, and it kind of goes in with the second question, you could be counted as voting. And it can cause confusion with counters if you're standing up when there's a vote occurring. So it would be required that people be sitting. We would have extra chairs if there were more people who showed up. We would also encourage that if someone wanted to sit in overflow type area, we'd still have all the same access, that they would potentially even bring like a lawn chair or something like that. Because we just want to make sure that people do what they can to be safe. If someone wants to sit on the knoll, I'm sure that wouldn't be that much of an issue either. It's just a case of making sure that people are safe on it. As for the voting process, I'm sure that would potentially be the same, where we would have counters and we'd potentially start with a voice vote unless it seemed like it was far too close to call on a voice vote. And then we would go and do a standing count. I think the hope is that we'd only have to do a standing count if there's something that ends up being much more controversial. So the solar might turn into that. I don't know what the current, I haven't engaged with the community feeling on it is. I know there's people kind of both sides of that one, but I don't know which side's stronger. So I think that in a situation like that, where it's a zoning article where you need to have that, the 2/3 majority going, you might see a larger chance of doing a standing count. Otherwise, I'm guessing most business will just be through a voice vote. We did kind of decide that this was probably not the time to be to go back to experimenting with electronic voting, and instead to just kind of stick to what we know. Let's just get it done as quickly as we can. And to answer your third question, the moderator has said, and I'll let him speak for himself for the most part, but he's made it clear that he's going to be really strict about keeping with those times. So people are going to be told you have X amount of time to talk. If you're going to be repeating the same point that someone's already made, you're going to be asked to sit down and let someone else have a turn to talk. We're going to do everything we can to make sure the concerns and the points the community has to bring forward are heard, but having people come up and say the same thing multiple times to try to drive it home isn't going to necessarily help get that information better ingrained in anyone's mind, especially if it ends up being something that the town meeting members are already leaning one way or the other on.
That's awesome. I always like that at the beginning of the meetings, be short, be to the point. Don't keep re-talking, because then you get people all upset and because, I'm not voting on this now. People do change their minds. And living in another town for a short time and watching theirs, I love the idea of the clock, that people can see the clock moving and know that their time's running out, and to actually say, wait, we just heard that, you got a different thing, and then just move them on to the next. And that's why some other towns finish their town meetings in one evening or one afternoon.
That's why most other towns with open town meeting finish their town meetings in their first day.
Yeah, we seem to let people continue and drag it along and so forth. So the quicker the better. Get your business done. Run it like a business meeting, because that's exactly what it is.
Yep.
No, it's not. It's a town meeting, and that's part of our little town charm.
What, to hear the same story over and over again?
Yeah. Mr. Moderator. Yeah.
Mr. Moderator. Oh,
So,
we love
Connor,
you, Pat. We miss you.
I have a question to follow up on something you said earlier. The quorum is 1% of the population. Is that total population or voting population?
Voting population determined every 5 years.
5 years. Yep. And we're at 107 still?
117 still.
117.
So they're going to consider making possible for less than 117 people in town.
To be able to
26.
show up and for business to be done.
90%, they said you could have a reduction in that quorum?
Yeah, they said apparently the state allows for us to do as much as a 90% reduction. The town moderator's recommendation was to do 25% reduction.
I was going to say, what's the budget? Like 70 million? I mean, you're talking like 17 people.
I know that's the thing. Is that Tom actually said last night. He's like, this could, if we actually took the full amount that we were allowed, we could have 12 people sitting in a room deciding this whole thing.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely ridiculous when you think about how, like, it's already that we don't have all that many people who show up for a huge amount of money we're voting on.
Yep.
But to have just a small handful of people in the room deciding all that is crazy.
Well,
and they're not representatives. That's the other thing to always remember, is that the people who show up at town meeting, it's not a representative town meeting. So they're only voting for themselves on it. They're not required to vote for what anyone else in the room thinks.
Right.
Exactly. Which I think is what makes this town so great.
Yeah.
Because everyone does get to say their piece. Everyone is still neighbors and friends when they leave. But it's amazing when you go and you see a packed house. And, I don't have to tell you guys how many years, you've been at town meeting and so forth. And when there's nothing big on there, we have the moderator pleading on television, stop watching TV and come down here. We need a quorum. And, we haven't started town meetings as late as, for quorum reasons, the latest I ever seen was like 7:45. For last year's reasons with the big hot topics and extending it out to the Brown Gym, we had to start later. What was like 8:15, 8:30?
Yeah, it was because it was actually like right after 8. It was right after 8 that we started. So it's not an hour in.
Right, and that had nothing to do with quorum. That had to do with the topic.
The opposite.
Right. So you still have the same people voting on your budget every year, but when you want to make a leash law, you're going to fill that place up, and you're going to hear the same 25 comments on the aisles. So let's keep the conversation.
I know. Don't even get me started on that. So, Connor, before we run out of time here, I would like to discuss town election.
The election or the primary?
The primary.
There are 1,095 primary elections, including the 22.
For some reason,
I didn't know we had a co-guest. Who's our second guest? Get that second
For
guess.
some reason, whenever anyone says election, the dot thinks that I'm talking to it. It has been the most annoying part of doing any of these.
Yeah.
Connor, do you like Star Trek?
A little bit. Julia's actually a bigger Star Trek fan than I am.
You can change it from her name to computer.
Yeah.
Just saying. which I've done at home.
So sorry to get back on topic. You're talking about the primary that's
Yeah.
for September 1st, right?
When is that happening?
That's going to be September 1st. It's going to be the normal hours at the polls. So it's going to be from 7 a.m. in the morning until 8 p.m. But for those, many people have already opted to vote by mail.
Yeah.
Whether they want to return it by mail or they want to drop it off in our lockbox at the front of Town Hall so that we can receive it directly there. And the other option as well, for those who are just trying to avoid the congestion of the polls but want to still have the experience of going and voting in person, is to go and vote early in person over at the Senior Center from this Saturday, the 22nd, until Friday, the 28th. During the week, it's going to be on our normal town clerk office hours that it's going to be running over there. On Saturday and Sunday, we'll be running from 10 a.m. until 2 p.m. each day.
Okay. All right. So that's a lot. That's a lot of stuff for that. And if Matt doesn't already have it all throughout our multimedia empire, he will today. Getting people. I wanted to go first to a question that we had emailed into us. And I'm thinking I know what the answer is, but I'd like to hear it from the town clerk. Ed emailed us and said, if I opt for early voting and my candidate drops out of the 3-person contest, has my vote been wasted? Also, what's the solution to that?
So so right now, if you voted early by mail and you've already mailed in your ballot, then it's counted as it's already gone through the machine. It's voted. So that's something to keep in mind when you're doing it. But what I think is important to keep in mind that you also run into risks the closer you go to pushing to like dropping it off. So yeah, you could potentially argue that if you voted for someone who dropped out, but you had already cast your vote before, then yeah, you might feel like you've wasted your vote. However, I think the solution isn't something that can be done overnight. I think the best solution to work towards to fixing that is to look towards things like ranked choice voting, where we're able to look at can we then say, okay, well, the people who this person's dropped out or they didn't get any votes or whatever, they then go into round 2 where their second choice person gets to be able to collect off their votes. And it's stuff like that that gives the chance for that vote to not be wasted and to better refine this system.
Right. Bob?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the election process as long as we're talking about, Connor. How much more difficult is it for you in the town to keep track of ballots that are one, mail-in, absentee, come from the senior center, early voting, and the final election day vote? How do you get them all together? Do you count them early and then add them up as you go? Do you wait to the end and count every ballot the same? Explain.
So technically, there are 3 different types of ballots now, or 3 different types of voting. There's absentee, which we all know and are used to. There's voting at the polls, and then with early voting, it was split into 2. It was split into early voting in person and early voting by mail. And so it's been a truly Herculean task to be able to keep track of all of it. And it's unfortunately meant that a lot of people who've had other day-to-day stuff have had to be told, we're going to have to get back to you in a few weeks. Because it's just a lot. And we've had thousands of applications coming in from the postcards that Secretary Galvin sent out And we've had the secretary's office breathing down our necks about it the whole time. And so it's been very difficult to be able to keep an eye on all that. Am I confident that we have organized and tracked all of those as best we can? Yes, absolutely. But there's still a lot of confusion around it when we don't have the time to be able to talk with voters. Like usually an example of it would be someone's an unenrolled voter and they request absentee ballots for the year, but they don't designate which party ballot they want for a primary. Now, usually what I'd end up doing is I'd just either send them another application and like highlight the spot that they needed to just fill out, or I'd give them a call and say, hey, can you send me a letter or an email that just says like which ballot you want if you want to vote in the primary. But we barely have time for that. And the Secretary of State's office told us that, we shouldn't be using our time to contact voters for that. If they call us and ask, why didn't I get it? We can say, oh, you just need to specify your party. But it's one of those things that doesn't sit well with me as someone who likes to make sure that people are getting what they're intending to get when they're signing up for it, even if they're not 100% sure of how all of it works and what they're supposed to say on their forms.
And do you have a feeling that on the mail-in, early mail-in, that I don't know. I'm going to ask, is there a guarantee that all the ballots will get to you?
I can't say there's a guarantee because I can't go on the post office for it because I don't know with all their interactions. I know when I send my ballots out by mail, which I'll also say that from the outside, the early ballots and the absentee ballots are almost indistinguishable. The only thing that's different is the inner envelope that you actually seal your ballot in has a different affidavit on it. And one says early, one says absentee. But otherwise, they're almost exactly the same. So over the past few years, I've seen instances of high volume elections where I've either received ballots that were significantly late or they never showed up at all. And every once in a while, I have someone call and say, why didn't my ballot get counted? And all I can say when I look back at all of our records is we never received it. And, it's not something that we can control or something we can even anticipate if the person just decided they didn't want to vote by absentee or by mail. So it's hard for us to be able to track what the intent of the voter is on that. But
is it possible for somebody to know that their ballot didn't get counted?
Yes. So right now, I know the secretary has a tool online to show for statewide elections whether your application was received and when your ballot was mailed, and like when it was returned, if it was returned. It'll say not returned otherwise. And granted, if someone sees their ballot's not returned, they're like, I mailed that a week ago, don't panic too much. It pulls that info right out of my system. And so it might just be that we just didn't scan it just yet and didn't, log it in. But might just be in like quarantined mail or something for a day. But the other piece of that is just that if someone looks and sees it, technically how you vote is completely private, but your voter history is public. Anyone can call up and say, was my vote cast in any particular election? We've had people look up before, like what someone who's running for a local office or even a statewide office, what their voting history is by just seeing how often do they go to vote, how many town meetings do they attend. And that's because they can just call up and get the list of their entire voter history for the last like almost 30 years from my office.
Wow, that's really interesting. So I'm going to ask, if you don't mind, to get your soapbox out for a minute, because I'm curious from your perspective what you think. I am not really interested in the political conversation that's happening in America right now, with, whether we should be doing vote-in mailing, whether the post office is going to be. I'm not really into that. But what I am curious about for this particular conversation, let me ask you a question. Isn't there something wrong that the greatest democracy in America can't do something to make it easier to vote? And I'm thinking about making Election Day a holiday so people don't have to, go to work and can have time to vote, or whatever else. Like, isn't there more to be done with encouraging a informed and engaged populace?
So this is it. You're definitely like set up the soapbox for me and dusted it off. So this is something I'm extremely passionate about, in making sure that we eliminate the roadblocks that are in people's way to allow them to vote. It is entirely your decision if you want to go and vote, if you want to find a method, if you want to order an absentee ballot. But there are certain aspects where it would be, I think it's almost unfortunate to say, like, why can't we do these things? It's like, we easily can. It would be so easy for us to do something like make Election Day in November a national holiday. It would be so simple. We can predict when Election Day is going to be for decades out. It doesn't make any sense to not do something like that when we can do something that simple that might be able to just slightly increase voter turnout. And because it's on a Tuesday, it's not like you're going to give someone a long weekend out of it. What you're going to do is you're going to get people to say, okay, well, I'm at work on Monday, and now I'm going to go in on Tuesday. Before I go in on Tuesday or whatever, I can have time to go and vote. That's a simple one that would be so easy for people to be able to do. I think that there's a lot of mystery, and I think there's a lot of need for more education around civics. I think teaching people early on about how the whole system works is absolutely vital for getting involvement going, and making sure people are not only know how to vote, but know how it all impacts everything around them and drives them to want to vote and motivates them to vote.
Somebody should make a video about that.
Yeah, right?
We're laughing. We had a Girl Scout who did her gold award and did exactly that, aimed towards the teens at the high school. And Connor actually narrated it, and it actually came out really well. And it's on our YouTube page, so I'm sure.
Phenomenal job with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I thought it was interesting I was looking at stats that credit where credit's due, is Amy Ritterbush prepared this big list of stats for who turned up for the most recent town election and who voted based on age, based on, and for past years as well, and kind of looking at generational gaps too. And we're seeing a surge of younger generations that are showing up, and it's mostly Gen Zers, even though the millennials aren't really showing up. And so I feel like I'm the lone wolf in the millennials who's still going to the polls to vote for town elections. But
now you've seen that information. So you said that the youth vote is surging.
Yep.
And how recent is that? How long has it been happening? Do you remember?
It's been steadily increasing from the look of it over the past few years. And, I think a big piece of it is we've been really encouraging going to vote. We've had I would say we had a lot of parents of these kids who are more and more involved in town government and involved in their in state government and federal politics and everything now, that they're seeing it more as they're growing up. And then you add in the fact that it's made easier for them to register. That, ever since when I started was when they started they started the the pre-registration, where you could pre-register at 16 or 17, and then the moment you turned 18, you were registered to vote. And that started to catch all these kids when they were going to the RMV to get their driver's permits, and they were, going to, or they, just any of this stuff, and they were getting pre-registered to vote, and they were ready to go for the moment they turned 18. I've had to turn away kids when they come in, because they come in and it's like, oh no, you're 16, you can't actually vote yet. But that's great to see that kind of energy of people who want to come in and vote.
Right.
And it's an energy that I think has been lost for a while. I think certain generations will tend to take it for granted, and it's not pointing fingers at any generation in particular, just the fact that over time, the further you get from the point of where you had to fight for the right to do something, the more you get comfortable with the way things are.
You know what? That, I think, is very profound. Very profound. I think that the people who fought in World War II, when they look at the American flag, they see something that is hard for people who were born after World War II to appreciate. I've talked to veterans and what that means to them. And it amazes me. I'm sorry to get on a tangent, but it's just so amazing. It amazes me that I hear so many veterans say, if somebody wants to burn the American flag, I support their right to protest. And to me, that's not the American flag. You know what I mean? So the American flag is what we respect and what it stands for America. And to see people who gave so much to give us the freedoms that we have, really defend that all the way through, I find very impressive.
And that's why you tend to see that when you have periods of social upheaval or international upheaval, that's where you have an increase in civic participation.
Right.
And I think that's part of what we're seeing now too.
Yeah.
The past few years, we've seen that increase in everyone being more closely involved in politics, regardless of what your politics are.
All right. So I don't want to go too far into you know what? I mean, I can't imagine that happening here. How safe is our election here in Hopkinton? And do you have a viewpoint on the Massachusetts election system?
I think that there's still things that can be worked out with it, but we are so much better off than so many other states. There was some video that was circulating that I saw on Facebook or something that I tried to debunk the moment I saw it, because there was some person complaining about, look, the ballot envelopes identify what party you are, so the postal carrier can just like toss this one and keep this one. And I immediately jump in. It's like, those aren't Massachusetts ballot envelopes, which don't have any identifiable information on the mailing envelope. It just says that it's ballot enclosed, it's going to the town clerk's office in Hopkinton, and that's it. And on the inside of that is your additional sealed envelope that has the information that we need to be able to log everything in and show that you agree to the terms of voting by absentee. It's really not realistic to have a lot of these fears that are going around. Now, yes, there are going to be inefficiencies with the post office. Unfortunately, the post office has also been they've been losing money for years, and they haven't had once been able to get support from Congress to be able to try to make up that shortfall. So, of course, there's going to be inefficiencies in a system where you're not willing to fund it.
Right.
So that's right. Because the post office is all self-funded.
Yeah.
Which amazes me, because we'll bail out airlines and automakers, but we won't bail out our own postal service. I never could figure that out.
Service is so vital in the sense that, I mean, there's some people who keep talking about like, oh, we should just switch to going privatized. But I mean, and yeah, we might not be affected at all. We might just pay a little bit more. but there's so many places that are much more rural that it's not
Don't get
profitable
anything.
to deliver anything there.
Yeah, they instead of having a rural box, they're going to have to drive to the city, 30 miles away to get the meal.
Yeah.
No, it's a shame. And I always I never saw the irony in that. It's just amazing. We can't bail out our own post office, but yeah, let's give all these monies that are letting their executives. How many postmasters have a golden parachute when they have to resign or or they retire or whatever? You don't have that.
Well, we don't know. Maybe they will bail them out. I mean, they're talking about it. And also, not to get too far into the weeds, but one of the big problems that the post office faces is that Congress required them to pre-fund their retirement, which, as they say, no business in America has to do.
Right.
And that's taking up so much of their money.
True.
Connor, just a quick question as we're getting to the close to the end here. Is your system for elections and balloting the same system in every town in Massachusetts? Is that a statewide, everything's uniform?
It is mostly uniform with very small changes between towns. We're given really strict rules and regulations, and there's slight wiggle room with different towns on how you can execute them. But at the end, those rules they give guarantee that that there's no breach in oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the word, but getting that ballot from point A to point B, the chain of custody there. There we go.
Okay. No kidding.
So,
you guys use chain of custody? Wow.
yeah,
That's something I would expect the Chief Bennett to be talking about.
So I mean, it's been a big question too with the security of mail-in ballots, and I explained to people I hack those ballots myself with the help of Lynn and other people who election workers that we can get the help of, any town hall staff who can help stuff envelopes and slap labels onto envelopes. And then I go through, run all of them through postage, seal every single one of them myself. And I walk one of those big postal bins down to the post office, hand it off to them and say, here's the big box of stuff that has to stay in town. Here's the small stack that has to go out of town. Yeah. So that way they won't even necessarily send it off to a distribution center. So it doesn't leave town and people will start getting them same day, if not the next day.
You know what? I don't know if you know this, but that's really impressive. It's really impressive to hear who the people are who are actually doing this and what they're doing. It's not like this big conglomerate with a bunch of machines around. It's you and real people in our town hall taking care of business.
And then keep in mind, that's why it might take a little longer to get your birth certificate or something too. It's just
all right. We'll cut you some.
It's a lot of ballots to stuff.
All right. So, last thing, and this is just a personal opinion. How concerned are you about the state of our nation's election?
Of our state or our nation? So
our nation. I think you talked about our state, and that sounds pretty good. But what do you think about overall, from what you see in the news and what you're hearing? What's your opinion? And this is an opinion piece.
Yes. I think that there needs to be a serious look at overarching national election reform. I think there are a few states that do a really great job with it. I think Massachusetts does a fantastic job because our system allows for an easy audit trail. It allows for tracking of that chain of custody. However, I think that there's a lot of states that don't necessarily have that. And the problem is that one state having one of those issues, one state having one of those fiascos, erodes faith in the system across the country.
Excellent. All right. So
some national thing would give us, I think, a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that perspective on that. And always, thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for having me as always.
Oh, I expect we'll be asking you back soon. Thank you so much, Connor.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
You too. Thanks so much for watching this hour. We hope you join us tomorrow when we'll have the Board of Health officials taking your questions and talking about the coronavirus updates. And on Friday, we'll have Tom Nappy talking sports. And Monday, don't forget, Chief Bennett. Take care, everybody.